Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, Marc Levy, who's written an accomplished book of short stories called How Stevie Nearly Lost the War and Other Post-War Stories about his, well, based on his time in Vietnam. It's fiction, but it's based on, his experiences. Marc Levy was in the infantry medic in the D-17 First Cavalry in Vietnam and Cambodia. His decorations include the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, the Air Medal, and Arcom. His work has appeared in various publications, including New Millennium Writings, Cutthroat Slant, War, Literature and the Arts, Counterpunch, Best American, and others. He won the 2016 Syracuse University Institute for Veterans Award and Military Families Writing Prize, judged by Brian Turner. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I was going to ask you first, in your title story, How Stevie Nearly Lost the War, the title character is dealing with his civilian life, and because of all these flashbacks and things like that, he's not able to even really establish a relationship. He's not able to accept love. I imagine this is loosely based on your kind of experience. Is this still, many years after the fact, is this still an issue anymore, or have you gained perspective?
It comes and goes.
Yeah.
It's just part of the part of the way it works.
Okay. So, but have you ever a better handle of it on it now than somebody?
Yeah, because now at least I understand a little bit of what's going on, so a little better handle.
Like, what do you understand?
Well, that PTSD is not unusual, that it does affect my judgment, that it can make me pull back, can make me emotionally numb, can make me alienated, can make me suddenly angry, can make me just kind of feel like I'm invisible, disappear. And then there are times when I'm more grounded and present and open and more normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You had a quote, war is sweet if you don't know it. But in essence, there is a sort of sweetness to war. Many of the men wanted to actually go back. I don't know if I call it sweetness, but there's something that many of the men wanted to go back into that situation again. Maybe you can comment on that.
Well, I'll generalize.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind is guys go back because they don't leave. They extend when they're over there, whether it's Vietnam or some other war. It's exciting. It just is. Just, if you're in infantry, or if you're doing something covert, or you're a helicopter pilot, or you're working with the artilleries, it's just exciting. And other guys that I've met, they come back, they try to fit in, they can't, for whatever reason. Where do they fit in? They go back to Vietnam.
So there is a sort of bitter sweetness then, I guess, in a way.
I think that's one way to put it.
How would you put it? Just...
Well, there's maybe paradoxical sweetness, or kind of the same thing.
Okay.
There are 2 tour Vietnam vets, relatively uncommon. 3 tour, pretty uncommon. There's a couple of, probably dozens of cases of guys who were there 4, and in one case, a Medal of Honor winner 5 times. He was really, really good at what he did. First name Frank, and his last name will come to me.
I was going to ask you, in the story, Off the Road, I believe it is, you have a character retrace his steps in the war, and he's just surprised by the ignorance of a lot of the people of what went on. To him, it's a central thing in his life, and you were just talking about how you feel invisible. Was this character trying to regain some sense of himself,
Well, this is On the Road.
Yeah.
This is a travelogue. That's a nonfiction piece.
Oh, okay.
I'm just writing
Okay.
first person.
Okay, so let's put you.
Yeah.
Is this your way of to retrieve memory? I mean, memory is the memory lost, the soldier is lost.
When I went to return to Vietnam,
Yeah.
I had what I didn't put in that story was I was living in Northampton. I'd covered my little boarding house room with maps from National Geographic, the walls and the
Sounded
ceiling.
like Taxi Driver. Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just blocked out Vietnam. I knew that I was going to live in New Zealand for a year, which is what I did. And I knew that I was going to travel afterwards. So when I finished up work in New Zealand, I caught a plane to Singapore and made my way through Thailand and Laos, and then said, yeah, well, I guess I'm going to Vietnam. And so it wasn't on the map consciously, but in the back of my mind, especially in Laos, things started to heat up. I did go back to it's in the book where I fought and found fire bases where apparently very few people at that point in time in '92 had been, and also An Loc and Loc Ninh were the scenes of major battles in '72. Apparently I was the first person they had seen in An Loc in about a year, and in Loc Ninh, who knows. So at a certain point it became a pilgrimage, but it never started out that way.
Now, you had a lot of things, quote unquote, as the poet William Carlos Williams say, have a lot of things in your writing, not just vague concepts, in order to define characters and yourself or whatever. And like Tim O'Brien, the things they carried, or we were talking about Tim O'Brien. I was going to ask you, how influenced were you by Tim O'Brien?
I liked Tim. I met Tim at Joyner. I studied with him for one workshop.
Right.
I thought he was a great guy. And
because I noticed in your speak out section, you're sort of listing, it's had that sort of effect that Brian did, and the cumulative effect is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think what I learned from Tim was basic technique, and the same, maybe more so with Larry Heineman, just how to tell a good story, how to get the tension in there, how to develop a plot, and how to make it the whole thing tight and satisfying.
Okay. So I was going to say, we were talking about the William Joyner Institute at UMass Boston that was started by Kevin Bowen and who else?
William Joyner himself.
Okay.
Dave Connolly from around here.
Oh yes, you used to have the South Boston Literary Review. Yeah, I met him a few times. So it was started, and now it's in trouble. Maybe you can give us some background and what the William Joyner mission was. And you say it's made history, and you remember you are a member, and been taking classes there, and I did way back. So just give people an idea about this and what we may lose as a result of the UMass budget finagling.
So William Joyner Center was started by when people invested in veterans, and initially started out advocating for veterans and helping them through the campus maze and getting them involved in campus activities and helping them through, from freshman year to graduating. And eventually became a place where scholars from other countries came, and symposiums were organized, and exchange students were involved. Writers from other countries came, initially Vietnam, and then they developed gradually a writer's workshop once a year. During that time, especially right after, during the war, a couple of people in Joyner were involved in POW exchanges, of all things. And they were instrumental in creating a relationship between the United States and Vietnam. You just don't hear about this stuff. And over the years, they've had some really great writers from around the country teach at Joyner, and they've had some celebrated writers from Vietnam come and return. And of late, in the last year or two, they've been losing funding as a result of the apparently mismanagement of funds by the trustees of UMass Boston. So Joyner and a few other institutes are on the chopping block, and they may be gone within the next year.
Okay. And what can people do to help?
Joyner has a website.
What's that? Do you know what
it's the William Joyner Institute at UMass Boston. They've got a petition up. That's done. So it was a little demonstration about a week and a half ago. 4,000 people had signed.
And you noted, and I noted earlier before our discussion about they're buying Ida College with all this budget problems, and so they're saying that UMass again is getting short-riffed, especially, and the William Joyner Center among other programs, right? So
what people can do is stay apprised of the what's going on, and I think they can still donate money to help Joyner organize and try to fight UMass Boston Board of Trustees and stay funded.
Why don't you think they appreciate it? It's not a moneymaker?
It's not a moneymaker, and they're way in debt, and wherever they can cut, they will, and they are, and they have.
Okay. Now, you don't see that happening at Amherst, UMass Amherst. No, was your family a veteran? Any veterans in your family?
The short answer, my uncles were. And I think a few of them may have seen combat, I'm not sure. And my father was in the service, but he didn't see combat.
Okay, but there's the World War II veteran, and I think we discussed this when Michael Anthony was at Endicott, you were there. There's the World War II veteran, the Vietnam veteran, the Iraqi veteran. What's different about the different sensibilities? I mean, he was talking about how there is a different sensibility between, I mean, there's certainly a lot in common, but there's also a different sensibility among these type of veterans.
Well, I think start with World War II guys. So that they bought into the whole patriotic thing, and there was Pearl Harbor. So, and they came back and they didn't, by and large, talk about it. Right? So they buried it in themselves. Then you get Korea, bad war, and those guys, by and large, you just don't hear about them. Right? Then you have Vietnam, bad war, protest, 1968. It's all over the place. And to make matters worse, a couple of people in the psychiatric field organized and said, we're going to call this something, what these guys are coming back with. And that's, in a nutshell, how PTSD finally got into the DSM, which is the manual for psychiatric. And they became more or less not a fully fledged political force, but the country is aware of Vietnam veterans, and Vietnam is still a shadow. It casts a long shadow in the history of the United States. And then 2001, 9/11, and the all-volunteer army, and all these guys go over, and they all over the years, scandal at the major military hospitals, and guys getting kicked out for fake reasons, boarded out, and guys coming back now with diseases from burn pits, all these guys committing suicide, and weak Veterans Administration not really helping these guys as much. And so I feel sorry for them. They don't have the same kind of feeling, emotional drive that I think Vietnam vets did. I mean, but they're finding their way, and otherwise they'll be ignored.
Yeah. Now, did you come from an upper middle class family, a middle class family? You came from a working class family?
Working class.
And so you weren't college bound or anything?
I was in college, but I was struggling. So I dropped out, and I was drifting, bought the Army propaganda, was really not that well morally or politically informed, and said, I gotta find my way out of here, and signed up.
So it's an escape from one hell to another.
But I had braces.
You had what?
I had braces on my teeth, so when I took the exam for the Army, they kicked me out right during the physical exam. They said, open your mouth, right at the end. Because I'd taken the test, okay, you're in. And then the sergeant came over and said, open your mouth. And I did, and he goes, I'll skip the obscenity. He said, get out of here. Birdcage mouth, get out.
What's a bird cage?
But he meant the braces. It was like a bird
Why
cage.
don't they want?
I went to see my orthodontist, and he said, it's, people don't talk about this, but people come to me as an orthodontist to put braces on their kids' teeth. The Army won't take you. So
why wouldn't the Army take you with
they
braces?
don't want the maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, take them off.
Oh.
So not knowing that he was a colonel in the reserves,
Uh-huh.
which he didn't tell me till I saw him when I came back, and I dissed the Army completely. But so he took them off, and I went over with a retainer, which I would clean in the jungle with a little tab of Effordent that I'd throw in a sea ration can every night.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, thank God for braces. I never knew. I know, slipping something in the urine and all that stuff. I never heard about braces. But so you got about 12 minutes to read from your work. And so please do whatever you wish.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to do first is I'll read an excerpt from a story called Bluefields, which is about a bunch of activists, and they've gone to Nicaragua, and they are there to give medical aid and to talk with the people and the culture. So at this point in the story, there's about 10 activists, which consist of healthcare workers, doctors, and nurses, a pharmacist, and a war veteran. And they've got this clandestine meeting with the Contra, who were the American-backed guerrillas during the Civil War with Nicaragua, bad guys. But the war is is over. And there's a clandestine meeting in Bluefields, which was a place on the east coast of Nicaragua that had been hit by a hurricane in 1988. So there are 4 or 5 Contra on this little stage, and the Americans have been asking them very polite, non-threatening questions. And the war veteran is getting a little wound up about it. And he says, do you have nightmares? To the Contras. Do you jump or drop at sudden sounds? Do you think about killing people or that people want to kill you? Ever feel that you have no feelings? Ever feel you don't belong? Do you get sad or lonely? Do you get depressed and drink too much? What about thoughts of killing yourself? What about anger, shame? What about sorrow and guilt? Ever feel like the war is happening right now? The Contras shift about on their low-set stools. The captain, with new life in his eyes, draws breath, clears his throat, speaks to each of us. Like the dead dog, the bull's blood, and the midnight thief, the unexpected is happening. In wind-torn, flooded-out, blown-down, phoenix ash Bluefields, in a darkened room, a half-filled dead man rises lotus-like from the depths of his tropical mud. The captain says that after the fighting he continued to live in the jungle, and each morning woke with blood in his mouth. Blood in my mouth, he repeats. The captain says the anger made him grab his weapon, lock it, load it, raise up, walk about, look for someone to kill. But the war is over. There is no one to shoot. He is going crazy. The captain says in the jungle he found a bush doctor who mixed handfuls of long-stemmed herbs. A bush doctor who said, light these things, inhale the smoke, and you will be well. With his graceful hands, the captain wafts invisible smoke into his squinting face. He inhales the fumes, holds his breath, exhales. After 20 minutes, he puts the burning stalks down, and he slept 3 days straight. When he woke, he was cured. The blood, it is gone, the captain said. Gone. The boy unfolds his arms to reveal the silk-screened words, Nantucket rectilinear, stenciled across his shirt. He will not reveal his name. He tells us fireworks, firecrackers, backfiring cars, bright lights cause him to crouch, run, hide. He reaches behind his back, lifts the tail of his shirt, delves, brandishes a stub-nosed .38. From where I sit, I can see the tips of the bullets chambered in the rotating cylinder. I take her wherever I go, says the boy. Wherever I go, I take her. We'll stop there.
Oh, right. Well, read on. That's it. Anyway.
Okay.
But I had a question for you. Now it slipped my mind though. Oh yeah, you were telling me. You know, we had the new movie, the Post, coming out, and you said you actually were on TV with Ellsberg. Maybe you just give us that little anecdote.
I came back from Vietnam. I was stationed at Fort Devens.
Yeah.
And I couldn't fit in. I couldn't deal with stateside stuff. So I, at a certain
bureaucracy, you know, all that
the life, you know, it was get back into being a soldier.
Yeah.
And I'd already had problems with an officer in Vietnam who tried to send me back out in the jungle.
And didn't you threaten him or something? You know, I was thinking that these, you said stories, so I said some of them were fiction and some
of them
not.
are not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he tried to send me out, and I was out in a fire base, and my time with the platoon was up, the company, and I came back.
Oh, that was a young lieutenant, right?
Yeah. I got on a chopper and found him, and as I was walking toward him, and I was locked and loaded, because they had given me a direct order to go back out to the jungle.
And he was green, yeah.
And I was cursing him, and he put up his hands and surrendered to me. Never bothered me again. So when I got back to Devens,
you could have been like court-martialed.
I could have, and I asked an officer about that a couple of weeks ago. I said, I wonder why he never bothered me. And this guy said, you know, he probably thought you were going to kill him, and he probably just wanted to forget about it. Because I had mentioned it also to a friend of mine when I went to visit him in Monroe, Michigan in 97, 98, who was the RTO in the platoon. And I said, yeah, he never bothered me. And he goes, and he said the same thing. So with Dan Ellsberg, I got involved with the anti-war movement in Devens. And was
anti-war movement at Devens. So right in the base there was an anti-war.
Right outside the base in Air, there was a little bookshop called the Common Sense
so it
Bookstore.
wasn't in the base. No.
Right. So we actually had a little radio station broadcast at a WAAF in Worcester once a month or so, called Radio Free Devens, and the Army didn't like that. And at some point, Dan Ellsberg was giving a talk in Boston, and a few of us went, and when it ended, I went up to shake his hand, and there was a camera crew there, and they filmed us, just by chance. And then I went back to base, and the next morning the first sergeant, I was told, you know, report to the day room, and good first sergeant, he said, was that you I saw on TV last night? And I said, yeah. And this big strapping black first sergeant who made his way up the Army in those days, just coming out of segregated Army. So he fought his way up. He was a bull of a man, and he said, you're crazy, but someday they're going to write a book about you. Now get out of my office.
Great. So he sort of appreciated you in a way.
I think so.
Yeah. So you got another 7 minutes. Read something else.
Okay. I thought I'd read something new.
Okay, whatever you want.
All right. So, this is an excerpt from a story called Runtime 2640. It's about a 4-minute read. And it's self-explanatory. Claire was uncomfortable. Last week, Charles had provided her with dream content, material she had not observed elsewhere, and for which she was grateful. But now he was telling her things she did not wish to hear. Dreams. She wanted dreams. Back on track, she thought. Please, sir, back on track. Afterwards, said Charles, we searched the bodies. They did the same to us. Those people, those strange little people, with their high cheekbones, straight black hair, and their black clothes or green uniforms, their skin the color of sand. Little people with dime store diaries, 1-inch photos, tucked away charms, wrapped in paper balls of rice, strange money in plastic wallets kept close to the heart. Those people. Our scouts shouted, "Chu Hoi, surrender," but they didn't listen. They just kept coming. Claire inhaled deeply. the hint of impatience more than audible. "Talk about sleep," she said in her professional voice. "Talk about your dreams." He wished she would talk to him, engage in actual conversation. He often wished that. "Sorry," said Charles. He'd gotten carried away, had momentarily forgotten the agreed-upon subject of the research project. For 2 months he'd been daily poked, prodded, had his meds modified, his blood drawn weekly, his body and brain scanned, and each morning at precisely 5 a.m., a white-robed nurse or doctor gently poked him, woke him, stood back as Charles sprung forward, shook his head, impolitely rubbed his eyes, unsteadily reached for the pad and pencil, politely handed him to jot down his dreams. "From what I can tell, some of my sleep is dreamless," he said, "and for that I'm grateful. At home or here, I have my ritual. 1 pill close off, lights out, under the blanket roll left, sleep." And he told her, this woman, this Claire, who could have been his daughter, this budding medical doctor, that now, 30 years after the war, there were times, many times, though of late somewhat less, that when he dreamed, and he did dream, sometimes his nightmares were spiritual mimics, uncanny simulacrum, more real than life. His nightmares had velocity, he said. They possessed physical punch. They possessed real power. He knew this from periodically waking sprawled on the floor. Sometimes he would startle awake like a fish out of water, kept wet by the tears of its weeping. Even then, in the eye of his mind, the event lived. After the claymore's deafening bang, the blood-curdling shrieks, the terrified survivors stampeded past. And all night, oh, how they warbled and gasped and groaned, their final slurred words inaudible. Then, to the blinding staccato of crackling bullets, through the acrid plumes of blossoming smoke, there lay the man with no head. Beside him, leaning upright, the glassy-eyed girl, head tilted, as if spellbound, lost in a dream. Were they crawling forward? She is torn to pieces. Her eyes and ears, all that remain of her face, her sweetly exploded rosebud face. Look at them, these dreadful twins pinned to trees by swarming flechettes jetted from illegal artillery shells. Behold how hideous and